Hello everyone and welcome back. I'm your host, Veteran Mountain Man, and this is going to be Debunking Extremist ANCAP 3. Apparently, I've been too soft, so we're going to actually cover the reasons for a communal self-defense as well, in addition to individual self-defense. Because apparently I'm not getting enough of a point across to many of these ANCAPs, and they need another bit of education, so to speak. So, a communal self-defense actually is in two parts. Your police force, or law enforcement, which are people whose job are to do two things. One, provide backup to your own personal defense, and two, to assist with the idea of finding those who have slipped past and attacked you or wronged your rights when you were not present to defend them. Without these two concepts, you lose several key points of society. Number one, you'll lose all direct trade with anybody who's further away than your property boundaries. Second, you'll lose the ability to leave your property in a feeling of security with the ability to redress somebody who wrongs you if your property is violated when you're not there. 3, security of travel actually en route. While a police force does not guarantee you will not be set upon by bandits or robbers or highwaymen on the road, the fact that police are wandering around actively looking for criminals deters individuals who I discussed in my second video who will actually take advantage of nobody being able to actually prove that they did a wrong. In that, if you're traveling in this man-alone society that many of these ANCAPs are promoting, and you're set about by a highwayman, he has no discouragement to not just kill you and bury you after he robs you. Because there will be no police force to investigate. There will also be no police force casually wandering around looking for people violating other people's rights. Now, if you're going to claim, well, I'll hire mercenaries and have them protect me on the road, okay, that works in a one-on-one scenario. However, that does not work if there are more highwaymen or more criminals than you have mercenaries. Not to mention, the hiring of the mercenaries would be an overhead expense simply to trade. Because you would have to hire them to take you to the location you were going to trade and hire them to take you back. You might be able to negotiate a round-trip package, which might be cheaper than individual one-ways, but believe me, it would be rather expensive. Now, if you're going to say, well, I just won't travel to barter, then that does one of two things. It either limits you to bartering with those people who directly boundary your property, or those people that are willing to move around and come to you. Now, most people willing to trade will not come to your home. Why? Because it would be a severely dangerous scenario for them in this situation. They would be bringing their goods to your private residence with an unknown setup where you could murder them, bury their body, and keep everything they have. There would be no police to see you do it. There would be no police to investigate who did it. There would be no one to report that someone is missing. 2, so their family couldn't report to the police that they were missing after having gone to your place. And so it would literally breed criminal behavior, regardless of the NAP. Because see my second video where I discuss why the NAP won't govern society. Now, even assuming that you're able to mitigate all of these risks, and you're now at the location. Well, which location are you going to? Are you now going to put yourself in the position that we just discussed, where you enter into a place that is owned by the person that you're going to go get goods from, who knows that you have something to exchange already, where you could be killed, buried, and robbed? Or are you going to meet at an open-air location or a third-party location, which, of course, either you, he, or jointly you would have to lease? Now, this would be another expense on top of your barter session or your trade session to acquire goods. Now, I'm assuming you're going to select the third-party location. There's still a fundamental problem with this. If anyone else knows that this session is going on, you could be set upon, murdered, and robbed. Not just you, but the person you were going to trade with as well. Now these criminals have both your goods or currency or whatever you were going to use in exchange, and the merchant's goods or services or whatever they were going to exchange. And without a police force, there's nobody for either groups on either side of this exchange to report that either of you have not returned to your property. Now, this becomes very important because when you start talking about, well, I'm going to just stay on my property and produce all of my goods, fine. You could choose to do that. And we go back to one of the points I made in my first video, which is where you're going to ostensibly regress society to approximately early Iron Age because of some very simple facts. We'll use a few basic items to illustrate this. Let's start with your cell phone. You know, this thing right here. Here's my smartphone. As you can see, nice and pretty. Got a glass screen. I've got a silicone, case protector, so on and so forth. That phone is not something that you can produce on your own property, on your own, without very specific equipment, very specific chemicals, and a lot of expensive, specialized know-how. Now, granted, you could easily say, well, if I'm only going to live on my property and I'm not going to associate with others, I don't need this, so let's just get rid of this, okay? That's fine. Next comes to weapons and defense. We're going to look at a very simple weapon here. The AR-15. The AR-15 is made out of multiple pieces of metal, aluminum and steel, with composite polymer parts, such as your buttstock, your pistol grip. Many magazines are made out of polymer now, as well as your heat shields, which are a polymer and metal shield. Now, to produce an AR-15 from scratch requires hours of CNC work on a CNC machine with the appropriate patterns and the appropriate grade of metal, which you would have to be able to acquire without trade. Now, let's say, instead of, let's say you already have all your weaponry when this ANCAP thing goes off. That's fine. Ammunition is another thing that you'll need to be able to produce. And you'll need a fair amount of it. And you'll need it regularly. This right here is not even a 5.56. This is a 380 auto, also known as a 9mm short. This right here is extremely complex to produce by hand. You would need to mill a brass casing to very exacting sizes. You would need to mill a piece of brass tube to act as your primer. You would then need to fill your primer with an explosive substance that is a contact explosive due to pressure. You would then need to cast and swage your bullets. And then you would need to produce your powder. Now, this is a modern 380 cartridge. I can't reproduce this cartridge without mass-manufactured products. And the reason being is the type of primer used in this cartridge is proprietary. No one knows the formula except the company that makes them. The powder in this cartridge is a modern smokeless powder. It is not a simple formula of charcoal, saltpeter, and sulfur, which is what traditional black powder is. To manufacture the powder in this shell, you have to know the chemical formula, and it is proprietary that the gunpowder manufacturer who makes it keeps secret. Now, let's assume that you could somehow produce a modern cartridge for your modern weaponry. You would still have to take time away from producing crops, clothing, other items that you'll need, including basic tools, to make your cartridges. And that means that you're going to have to manage opportunity costs far beyond a simple exchange of currency for product. Now, let's say, okay, we understand the need for basic police forces. Yeah, it's not perfect, but it does have a legitimate role. Why can't we use private police forces? Well, the problem with private police forces is the same with mercenaries. They are only going to work as hard as they feel they are obligated for that contract to do it. And the truth of the matter is that even if you instituted a large number of private police forces, you would end up with some serious corruption issues. Because they are working exclusively for pay and they are not citizens within the community necessarily, that means that they would not be directly loyal to the community or responsible to the community except when they would be exposed as having taken pay from somebody outside the community to allow them to criminalize those inside the community. So you run into a serious problem there. Now, we understand why trade would need to happen. We understand what police provide to allow trade to happen. Let's now talk about things beyond police forcing and go to the shared military. Now, once again, this needs to be made up of private individuals from within the organization, country, nation state, wherever you're talking about. Because people from outside of that group who are paid to fight for that group will only fight as hard as they need to feel justified in completing their contract. And should you be killed while they are defending you, they will immediately stop. If you are likely to be killed or taken captive, they will stop because they are no longer being paid. You are not free to pay them, and therefore they're out of contract. Now they've got to go find other work. They're not going to die to avenge you. They're not going to risk their life more than they feel is necessary to justify the money that they've taken. And so you can't effectively defend your community, who are all trading together, with just police, as the police will be busy trying to ensure that nobody's rights are being violated inside the organization. The military is designed for an outward defense beyond the community. Okay? Now, are these solutions perfect? No. Are they important? Yes. And if you honestly think that you can have a functioning human culture without barter, which will need some form of shared communal security, and if you think that barter with that police force doesn't need a military to protect its exterior, let's look at this scenario. Let's say you've got on board, police can be useful. There is a need for police that are controlled by the citizenry, not by politicians, not by some big, large, nebulous government figure, but by the citizens. Why do we need a military at that point? Well, see, because in that point, people will be specializing, which will allow for the advanced production of goods and services beyond simple Iron Age technology. That will cause other groups outside your group to want what you have. Simple, pure and simple. And now we're back to the concept of the NAP principle. The NAP principle doesn't hold C video 2. Now, when you start looking at this, you're like, well, okay, so you'll have, people that'll want to come in and trade. Yes, that might be part of what they're going to do. But because not all people are good, and because some people are opportunistically criminal, and some people are legitimately just criminal, not to mention people are subject to envy, which can even turn a good person into an opportunistic criminal, you run into the situation of you have advanced goods, the next door neighbor state does not. Now, what does the next door neighbor state want? They want your advanced goods. They want your means of production. They want what you have. Basic premise of socialism. They're going to come and try to take it. If you don't have a group of citizens ready to bear arms to defend the outward border, you end up in a situation where you are going to be taken captive and forced into slavery for the other group's benefit. One of the things that protected the United States while its military was abroad in World War II was individual rights of gun ownership. But one of the things that allowed us to fight World War II and stop the Japanese from continuing to bomb our outlying districts, such as territories and even the state of Hawaii, was the fact that we had a national military that could move out of our borders and provide a communal defense. We also saw this in the War of 1812 against Canada. Without a military, we could not have effectively stopped the British from retaking the colonies. The British sacked and burned Washington, D.C. during this war. They effectively nearly ended the United States during this war. But because of a shared national defense, we were able to stop it. Well, this has been my discussion as to why shared defense is necessary and why even in an ANCAP ideology you will need a shared self-defense. Now, several of the ANCAPs are trying to claim that all I am doing is ranting here and not actually debunking their principles. Maybe you should actually pay attention to the content of the video instead of trying to actually make fun of me. Also, for those that have decided to ridicule the fact that I had a typo in a splash screen, well, everybody is human. Nobody's perfect. I've fixed it for this video. And as for the person who asked the question, why shouldn't 7 billion people be free to do what they want to do versus 7 billion people stealing from me? You've already invalidated your own argument. If you truly believe that 7 billion people within our current framework are actively stealing from you, and you think that by removing all government, they won't continue to want to actively steal from you and possibly even kill you while doing it, you need to rethink that seriously. Because that concept means that you have a fundamental flaw in your logic. Now, does this mean I support large government? No. Does this mean I support governments cramming down on businesses or the amount of taxation even in the United States? Not by any means. I do think that the United States can return to a pre-19th Amendment style governance. It will require the citizenry themselves to repeal the 19th Amendment and a convocation of states so that the federal government no longer has a federal progressive income tax, which that amendment nearly destroyed the United States and is slowly destroying the United States. That being said, you can't have advanced products, goods, and services, and you can't have barter without police and without a military. And another legitimate role of the police, which I'm going to go into here just before we finish, is the fact that they can also protect your rights after the fact. If you have no police force and you have to hire private police to attempt to redress somebody who wronged you when you were not able to defend your rights, see going to barter, you run into a very, very fundamental problem. Number one, if you can't afford the police, that means that your rights weren't violated because you aren't going to be able to redress it effectively. It would require you to leave your property, take time seeking out the person, should you even be able to find out who the person was, and redress your rights directly. Now, if you're going to say, well, we can create private fingerprint databases and private DNA sampling databases that people who have been aggrieved can access, you know what? That's far more statist and far more overstepping than I am even willing to go. So that idea, I'm just going to say, I'm not going to participate in. And if you want to live like that, you should probably go to China where they have that. Well, thank you all again for joining me. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. Hopefully I can do some more fun topics, including maybe even poking the eyes of a few commies again, because I much prefer to poke commies in the eyes than I do to poke anarcho-capitalists in the eyes. Commies are always so much more fun to destroy than the ANCAP argument, because I really wish ANCAP would work, but it really doesn't. And maybe eventually society will evolve to a point where it will work. And I hope I can actually see that day, but I don't think I will. Well, thank you all again for joining me. Please don't forget to like and subscribe and check out my other social media links down below.